and welcome to this second lecture within the context of the Holy Rail exhibition. I don't think I need to explain that this is not part of any new Ottoman project or anything of the sort. I'm happy to welcome today with us our guest lecturer, Dr. Talha Cicek. Dr. Cicek is assistant professor at Istanbul Madaniyat University. He received his PhD from Sabancı University. That's when I met him actually first. He has been the British Academy Fellow at SOAS, University of London, from 2016-2018. He has been also a visiting researcher at the Free University of Berlin, 2009-2010. He also received a fellowship from the University of Kuwait, where he learned Arabic. He has done extensive archival research in the Ottoman, Austrian, German, British, French, American state archives, any other archives that were left where you didn't do research. His research focuses primarily on the history of the Arab provinces under late Ottoman rule, that is in the 19th, early 20th century. He is the recipient of a number of awards. One of them is the prestigious Turkish Academy of Science High Achiever Young Academic Award for 2015. His research, as I said, focuses on the Arab provinces in the late Ottoman period. He's interested in particular in the history of Bilad al-Sham, Arab tribes, and in fact, some of you know his book on Syria during the First World War under Jamal Pasha, under the title War and State Formation in Syria, Jamal Pasha's Governorate during World War I, which appeared in 2014. He is also the editor of a conference proceeding under the title World War I, Politics, Economy, and Society. And he has just finished a book under the title Negotiating Empire in the Desert, Ottomans and the Arab Bedouin, 1840 to 1940. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Talha Cicek.
Thank you, Ustaz, so much for this very kind, generous introduction. I'm very happy to be here at American University of Beirut, this prestigious historical institution. It's my first visit to Beirut. I'm really impressed with the university and the city. I only saw the names on the documents now. It's a very good, very distinguished feeling. Thank you for your invitation. And today we will be talking about Hijaz Railroad. It will be a description of the story of its decision-making, construction, resistance, and social impacts. As many of you may estimate, the Hijaz Railway, the invention of the railways was one of the biggest revolutions in human history. And their function of the railways was significant, not only in that they connected the rural areas of an industrial country to its own market, but also because they tied underdeveloped countries into this chain. Railways were one of the major determining factors in the formation of today's global world. Locomotives began to operate in France in 1832. Concurrently, first plans in the Ottoman Empire were made in early 1830s to construct railway in the Ottoman territories. Therefore, the Ottomans were closely following the railway revolution in the West, and they tried to adapt themselves to the railway construction. But first railways, as you may know, were constructed between Izmir and Kasaba region, between Izmir and Kasaba in 1861, I think. This is the date of opening. And then during the time when we arrive at the decision of the construction of the Hijaz railway, there were a series of railways were constructed, had been constructed within the Ottoman territories in the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Arab territories. But the Hijaz railway project was somewhat different. This project came into being as part and parcel of Abdul Hamid's absolutist Islamist policy. As a result of losing the Balkans, the majority of the Christian community had seceded from the empire, leaving the Ottoman Empire to adopt a Muslim Asian identity. Henceforth, over 20 million of 25 million people living within the borders of the empire were Muslims. Abdul Hamid considered this situation and focused his efforts on holding at least the Muslim elements of empire together. The Hijaz Railway project can be regarded as part of this project. The Sultan aimed to reinforce bonds with the Arabs by constructing a railway from Damascus to Yemen. Infrastructural development as pious patronage formed part of the discourse of the Ottoman state, so that the official yearbook of the province of Beirut declared on the completion of the Hijaz Railway in 1908 that if there are any great and useful development in religion, science, and construction in the well-protected imperial domains, the sole promoter of all of them is the guardian of the true religion, the pious and distinguished caliph. This railway was therefore a demonstration of the Sultan's credentials as both a reforming monarch and a pious Islamic ruler, and provides a clear example of the late Ottoman state attempting to reconcile modernity with its own distinctive identity. As for the reasons, the first reason, one important reason, was to build an Ottomanized railway network, because until the construction of the Hijaz Railway, all the railways had been built in the Ottoman Empire by giving concession of the rights of operations of the railways to the Western states like France and Britain. Some of the railways within the Ottoman Empire was operated by France, and some others were operated by the British. And this was the first Ottoman national railroad. The Hijaz Railway Company was the first Ottoman railway. The Ottoman railways Another reason was to make Islam compatible with modernity, rebutting the likes of French historian and philosopher Ernest Renan, who claimed that Islam was incompatible with the modern science. The construction of a railway by the Muslims would demonstrate Islam's harmony with modern standards of reason and progress. Maintenance of law and order was another reason. Ottoman sultans, bearing the title of servants of the two holy cities, had always been concerned about maintaining law and order during the Hajj. Abdul Hamid assumed that the Hijaz railway would earn him prestige in the Islamic world and solve all the problems regarding the government at the same time. Finally, by the construction of the Hijaz railway, the transfer of soldiers to the remote and desert areas would be facilitated, and the enhancement of the interaction and easiness of transportation would improve the regional economic situations. Abdul Hamid's imperial will was issued on May 1, 1900, in the Sultan's birthday. But the preparations, of course, had started before that date. In 1896, for example, a commission had been established in Damascus, and the governor had been selected as its president. But the official firman was issued on May 1, 1900. The project sounded unusually ambitious because it was to be built and operated entirely by the Ottoman Empire. Foreign capital would not be raised. The Sacred Line, or the Holy Rail, would be a purely Muslim project built by Muslim engineers using only local materials. Wangenheim, the chief secretary of the German consul, reported that wooden traverses to be brought from Macedonia will later be used by the Bedouins for heating. They did not believe in the realizability of this project. The necessity of constructing a railway extending to Yemen was again reported in 1874 so as to properly control this area. In 1891, the issue was once again occupied the agenda of the imperial decision makers with the report submitted by a young Ottoman officer, Süleyman Şefik, to the Sultan. As for the financing, the Hijaz Railway, of course, donations created the biggest amount. Abdul Hamid took an important step by calling all Muslims to make donations to the railway construction. The Caliph emphasized in his call that the Mecca line should not be seen as an Ottoman railway only. It would become the joint construct of the Islamic world. This is why the Hijaz Railway had to be financed solely by Muslims and constructed by Muslim engineers. The power of Islam and solidarity among Muslims had to be shown to the entire world. Donation campaigns in various Islamic countries commenced with the support of the local media and religious leaders. Local Islamic media, various religious orders, religious functionaries, landed gentry, merchants, and other leading figures were among the ardent supporters of the donation communities. Ottoman diplomats in these countries also had an important function in the donation campaigns. Of course, the biggest share, the most significant example of the Hijaz railway donation campaigns was the Indian one. The Muslims who carried out the campaign in India founded the Hijaz Railway Central Committee with its headquarters in Hyderabad and offices in a number of cities. In India, there were more than 150 railway donation committees. Indians were interested primarily in the Mecca-Jeddah and Mecca-Medina lines. It was because the Hajis coming to Jeddah from India who would use only this section. The Mecca-Medina line was also important for them since they wanted to visit the tomb of the Prophet in Medina. Of course, it would be an important demonstration to the Europeans that Islam was capable to compatible with the modernity. And this shows that Islam was convenient to the contemporary civilization. This is another important reason that why colonial Muslims supported this project, because that would show to the Europeans that they were not racially inferior societies. As for Egypt, the British did not ban contributions to the railway project outright for fear of the reaction that might have occurred, but by the command of Lord Cromer, the highest British authority in Egypt, they at least prevented officials from joining the donation campaign. They also refused the Ottoman government's request for a 5 kurush donation from every Egyptian. The Hijaz railway donation committees, which were established the same as in India, sent donations to Istanbul via the Egyptian Extraordinary Commissary. Officials like the Bagh Effendi from Mecca were sent to Morocco by the Ottoman Empire to collect donations. The Bukhara emirs of the Central Asia sent 160,000 rubles as donation to the railway. The French government's approach to the campaigns in its colonies was harsher than that of the British and Russian governments. The French colonial authorities in Tunisia and Algeria applied every possible means to stem the tide. As for the Ottoman donations, the biggest contribution, of course, came from the Sultan himself. He donated 50,000 liras. The senior officials donated 1 month's salary as donation. It was half voluntary donation. Many military officers, notables, religious functionaries, and merchants supported the campaign. Every rank within the Ottoman military donated the Hijaz railway. The province of Syria, for example, pledged to donate an amount that equaled 1/10 of the province's annual tax. Aboud and Halbuni, 2 merchants from Beirut, from this city, donated 2,000 liras, which is a very substantial sum. Although the amount of internal and external donations was considerable, the continuation of the construction depended on finding new income sources. Apart from voluntary contributions, the state was to confiscate 1 month's salary of every government official, in effect cutting small amounts from the officials' salaries each month. Non-Muslims who were included at first were exempted in 1902. Also, a decree issued in 1903 stipulated that the May salary of all officials with income over 500 liras was to be cut by 10% annually. In addition, officials' March salaries would be cut in the name of Hijaz railway donation. Another important decision made it obligatory for all official documents to bear donation stamps. Starting from the 1901 pilgrimage, a certain amount of contribution was raised from Hajis who arrived at Jeddah unless they were extremely impoverished. If to evaluate, 41.5% of the total resources was collected through taxes and mandatory payments, and Muslims all over the world donated 34% of the total donations. And here is the percentages vis-a-vis the years. The first year, in 1903, 63%. In 1904, 55%. 37%. The next year, 35%. And in 1906, again 35%. And 1907, 32%. The remaining amount was the Ottoman donations and cuttings or so. Individuals who made extraordinary effort in raising donations were awarded a medallion of merit in addition to the Hijaz Railway Medal. I assume in the exhibition there may be some examples of these medals or so. Do we have?
Yes, especially called.
Okay. Some others who had contributed to the railway were honored with decorations and orders. Faik Pasha, for example, the head of the Beirut Delivery Commission of the Hijaz Railway, and his staff were rewarded with the decoration and medallion for their outstanding service and effort. Many Muslims from India, Egypt, Morocco, and other countries who had given close attention to the Hijaz Railway were awarded with the different kinds of medals. As for the construction, a commission was established in Damascus, and it would be responsible for the construction. In 1896, Abdul Hamid had appointed Nazim Pasha, the governor of Syria, to the chairmanship of the local commission established in Damascus. The starting point of the railway. Damascus was the starting point of the Hijaz Railway project. Nazim Pasha held the office until his resignation in 1908 with the constitutional revolution. Another important member of the commission was Marshal Kazım Pasha, the commander of the 5th Army in Syria. Sadiq Pasha al-Mu'ayyad, from the celebrated Mu'ayyad family, a military attaché of the Sultan, was appointed as Kazım Pasha's chief assistant. Sadiq al-Mu'ayyad had just fulfilled his duty as manager of the telegraph line installed along the Hijaz Railway. Therefore, he knew the region's topography very well. Edip Nazmi Bey, another member, was the secretary of the city council and the editor of the magazine Syria. Emir al-Hajj Abdul Rahman Pasha al-Yusuf, Marshal Jamal Pasha, Muhammad Fawzi Pasha al-Azm, from one of the most prominent families in the city, was the other members of the Damascus Commission. Another commission was in Istanbul, which is called the Supreme Commission or Commissioni Ali. The most important ministers worked as the members of the commission. Grand Vizier Ferit Pasha presided over the commission. Izzat Pasha al-Abid, a close advisor of the Sultan and the mastermind of the Hijaz Railway and telegraph projects, however, had always been the commander-in-chief right from the inception of the Hijaz Railway idea. The Supreme Commission would meet in Izzat Pasha's suite in the palace, which indicated that he was the key figure of the Hijaz Railway project. The general strategy would be determined by the Central Commission in Istanbul, and the local initiative, the Damascus Commission, initiative was delegated to the Damascus Commission. In 1902, the Damascus Commission was given more authority, and its power was expanded to solve the problems of coordination. Before the commencement of the construction, the Supreme Commission had decided to negotiate with the French DHB company, which operated the Beirut-Damascus Muzayrib line since 1895, and if possible, to buy the Damascus-Muzayrib section. Taking over the Damascus-Muzayrib line from the French would save 120 kilometers of the Hijaz railway construction. French demanded 10 million francs to hand over the line, twice more expensive than its real cost and value. Upon this, the Ottoman government decided to construct a parallel line and started his construction. The Ottoman government would have to buy the French line after the completion of a parallel Damascus-Muzayrib line due to the political reasons, paying 3.4 million francs in 1905. The Pilgrims Caravans route was decided to be followed. In the beginning, due to the inadequate plans and projects, some of the lines had to be removed and reinstalled. The objective of the recruiting only the Ottoman engineers was obviously unrealistic. It was the aim in the beginning. But it was decided to appoint an experienced chief engineer who had proven himself in his professional career to lead the technical staff. In September 1900, the German engineer Heinrich August Meissner was made Pasha and appointed as the chief engineer. But through the years, the number of the Ottomans working in the construction work had been increased. A certain number of the Ottoman engineers were sent to Europe in order to develop their professional skills. Nazif Bey el-Khalidi, for instance, who was one of these engineers, came from one of the prominent families in Jerusalem. After graduating from the Faculty of Engineering in Istanbul, he went to Paris and completed his education at the École Polytechnique. On his return, he started to work on the Hijaz railway and led the construction of the Damascus train station and several tunnels and bridges. He also participated in the railway construction work in Amman. The Hijaz railway was a marvelous opportunity for training Muslim engineers within the Ottoman Empire. As for the provision of the railway materials, the first need to construct a railway was the traverses, of course. The initial idea was to produce the railway materials in Ottoman workshops due to the Islamic nature of the Hijaz railway. The 1,382,000 traverses that would be needed in the first stage would be cut from the state-owned forests, and the Istanbul Commission decided to collect used iron from all provinces to use in rail manufacturing. Another item needed to construct railway was iron. Although the production started at the naval arsenal, the production of iron started at the naval arsenal Tersane-i Amire, in the Golden Horn, the rails manufactured were not hard enough to carry the trains, and consequently, rails were imported from Belgium and Britain. The United States of America was another country from which rails were imported. Belgian rails were used between Damascus and Ma'an, and American ones were laid from Ma'an onwards. Similarly, because the traverses manufactured from the wood of Anatolia trees could not resist the hot climate of Arabia, the traverse importation became necessary. Steel was also imported from a factory in the Oberhausen region in Germany. With similar reasons, all the locomotives were manufactured in Germany. In the end, all the railway materials had to be imported. As for the construction, it was quite quick process indeed. Firstly, the Muzayrib-Dar'a line, 13 kilometer, was opened in September 1, 1901, the day Abdul Hamid ascended to the throne. Dar'a Zerka line, 80 kilometer, was opened in September 1, 1902. When there was no hope left of making an agreement with the French in 1903, the 123-kilometer section between Damascus and Dar'a was completed. Zarqa-Qatrana line, 124 kilometer, was launched on September 1, 1903. In 1904, the railway reached to Ma'an via Amman. Due to the excessive costs of transportation through Beirut-Damascus Muzayrib line, the construction of a branch line from Haifa to Dar'a was decided. Construction started in 1903 and finalized in a short period of time. In 1904, it will be opened. Ma'an Tabuk line, 233 kilometers, was inaugurated in September 1, 1906. Tabuk Al-Ula line, 287 kilometers, was opened in 1907. From Al-Ula to Medina, Mukhtar Bey and its Ottoman staff successfully completed 323 kilometers in a year. And this section was not built by Meissner Pasha, and any non-Muslim did not contribute to this section because it was considered within the boundary of the Hijaz province, the Holy Land, I think. That was most probably the reason. As for the problems, of course, the water was the biggest problem and the biggest challenge. Efforts to dig water wells along the line was resultless. Thus, the water wagons were imported from Germany. Where the railway ended, the water was transported to the working areas by camel. Coal was also imported from the other countries and stored in Damascus and Haifa. The most problematic issue in the Hijaz railway construction seemed to be finding workers, master builders, skilled laborers, and other employees to work in the construction. The labor problem in Ma'an was resolved to some extent by recruiting settlers as wage laborers. Besides, the people, the Muslim people, to work by law. Living around, of course. This forced labor was generally used in excavations, but as the rails moved towards the south to the desert region, cities, towns, and villages disappeared. To compensate this gap, mainly railway troops composed of the soldiers were used in the construction. The soldiers who worked in the construction of the railway were exempt from 1/3 of their military service. In addition, the government paid 1 kurush to the soldiers for the excavation of each cubic meter of land. As for the resistance to the construction of the railway, the biggest resistance came from the nature itself. The most important problem was water supply during the construction. The only stations along the Hijaz railway that had water reserves were Damascus, Dar'a, Amman, Ma'an, Al-Hasa, and Mudawwara. The 113-kilometer region located between Ma'an and Mudawwara, and also 190-kilometer stretch between Al-Akhtar and Madain Salih were completely lacking in water. British resistance to extend the Hijaz railway to the Aqaba Gulf constituted another problem and prevented its extension to the Red Sea. It was considered by the Ottomans as a countermeasure to reach the Red Sea against the possible closure of the Suez Canal in case of a war. Another more serious challenge was the Bedouin opposition. The Bedouin question revealed two main conflicting camps in the Ottoman government regarding the construction of the Hijaz railway. One worked to build a partnership with the Bedouins in order to ensure the success of Ottoman imperial strategies along the southern frontiers. The other secretly wanted to derail the Hijaz railway project and therefore vociferously opposed the imperial government's plan to collaborate with the Hijazi Bedouin population. The first camp consisted of the Yıldız Palace and the Supreme Commission, with supporters in Istanbul and the provinces. Its leader was İzzet Pasha el-Abid. According to them, the success of the Ottoman penetration into the desert necessitated the building of a stable partnership with the local tribes along the road. The other camp comprised Ahmet Ratib Pasha, the Ottoman governor of Hijaz, and Aun al-Rafiq Pasha, the emir of Mecca. Despite their claim to the contrary, both the governor and the emir were set on preventing the railway line from reaching the provincial capital and their stronghold, the city of Mecca. It was in their reports to the authorities in Istanbul that derogatory language was used regularly, describing the local Bedouins as ignorant and savage, and predicting that the Bedouin violence would prevent the completion of the railway. A serious economic crisis and difficulty to pay the Bedouin subsidies complicated the issue further and obstructed a solution, which lasted several years up to 1908 revolution. In the end, the Ottoman government decided to shake hands with the Bedouin tribes. During the negotiations, chaired by the Emir of Mecca in 1908, tribal leaders voiced their complaints about the financial losses they would incur once the railway was completed. They mean, of course, the extension of the railway to Mecca. In order to build consensus, the Ottoman government agreed to keep paying the regular surra, a special sum paid during the pilgrimage for their protection service, in return for a vow of non-aggression. They applaud me? Do they applaud me? The construction work carried out to extend the Hijaz railway towards Mecca and Jeddah would also be suspended. In order to pay the tribes, the government decided to charge an additional 100 kurush per passenger in first class and 50 kurush per passenger in third, traveling between Madain Salih and Medina. Starting from this mutual accord until the rebellion of Sharif Hussein in 1916, the Bedouin attacks and conflicts in the Hijaz district almost came to an end. The final stage of the construction, however, was never completed. of course, the lack of completion was not due to the Bedouin resistance. The Ottoman state did not could not find enough money and political stability to sustain the construction activity towards Mecca and Yemen. And the main reason was not the Bedouin resistance, but the inability, the financial and political inability of the Ottoman Empire. As for the social impacts, I will use in this section the examples from Transjordan and HAIFA. The first one from Transjordan. Of course, I wanted to tell something about, for example, the changes brought about by the railway in Medina or in the Hijaz, but I could not find satisfactory documents in the Ottoman archives and anywhere. Therefore, I limited myself with Transjordan and HAIFA only. What happened in Transjordan? This is a quotation from Eugene Rogan's book. The consequence, he states that in his book, he explains that the consequences of the new line varied from one segment of society to another. It shortened distances for state and society alike. With stations every 10-20 kilometers apart and some 16 between Amman and the Hijaz borders, travelers on the railway line no longer measured distance by the old temporal calculation of 5 kilometers per hour. The line also proved an important stimulus for development in the towns it reached. The Damascus religious scholar Jamaluddin Qasimi traveled to Amman by train in April 1903 and was impressed by the commerce of the town, which is reaching the highest level of activity, as is the construction of buildings as a result of the numerous people settling there. The railway gave new access to markets for grain grown at the Transjordan frontier. The spur from Daraa to HAIFA, opened in 1904, provided access to Mediterranean markets, which quadrupled Hauran grain exports from HAIFA between 1904 and 1913. As for HAIFA, the history of the late Ottoman HAIFA was fundamentally shaped by the construction of a branch of the branch of the Hijaz railway connecting HAIFA and northern Palestine with the main line between Damascus and the holy city of Medina. The Ottoman government viewed HAIFA as the Hijaz railway's optimal access point to the sea due to the city's strategic location, granting it advantages over the coastal cities. The transport through HAIFA port increased, and the amount of goods imported and exported via the port multiplied. With the extension of the Hijaz railway to HAIFA, the city was connected to Damascus, Hauran, and eastern Jordan, turning it into a bona fide port city. The crops of these regions, particularly grains, were exported via HAIFA, while European and American goods and products needed by the region were imported. The introduction of the railway contributed to driving internal migration within Palestine and the neighboring regions to HAIFA in search of work, which increased the city's population. By 1904, the year the railway between Daraa and HAIFA was inaugurated, HAIFA's population had reached approximately 15,000. By 1914, its population had risen 23,000. During the period from 1903 to 1908, the railway project was considered the largest source of employment in HAIFA. Construction of the railway provided employment opportunities for hundreds of employees, laborers, and engineers who settled in the city and contributed to its population increase. The economic sector developed significantly following the extension of the railway between Daraa and Haifa. In addition to the Ottoman government's decision to make Haifa the general headquarters of its Hijaz railway, the railway itself and the port provided many employment opportunities. At the same time, merchants were able to benefit from these two important economic institutions due to the commercial benefits brought to the city and the successful building of a trade network with grain merchants in southern Syria's Hauran region to export their crops via Haifa port. The transport of crops from Hauran to Haifa was simplified by the railway services that delivered products to the port where they were packed and exported to determined destinations, particularly Europe. The Ottoman authorities doubled the length of the Haifa port to enable it to absorb the large commercial ships arriving there. Various economic subsidiaries related to the port and railway, known as complementary services, also flourished. These included, for example, construction and opening small commercial shops within the city, such as groceries, clothes and furniture outlets, restaurants, small hotels, and the like. Investors from Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine built factories and opened shops in the city, and it thus expanded to the north from the Hijaz railway station. This area was dotted with towering mansions, gardens, and commercial stores. Haifa welcomed thousands of Muslim pilgrims who arrived at the port and then traveled on the railway to Daraa and then on to the holy sites in the Hijaz to perform their pilgrimage rites. They would stay in Haifa only a few days, but the city's commercial and service interests benefited greatly from their presence. In actuality, transit activity in Haifa played a significant role in activating the city's commercial flow, whether by those heading to the Hijaz or those returning from it. The report of Al-Tamimi and Bahjat, I think this is the report, stated in 1915 the following. In Haifa, there are 37 industrial buildings, including 10 grinderies, 16 steam engines to draw water from wells, an ice plant, 7 wood factories, 4 olive oil factories, and a cotton factory. The Germans established a grape juice plant and the Jews established a soap factory, but these two establishments have closed down recently. The number of European consuls in the city also increased, such as the deputy German consul and the Belgian, English, and French consuls. The development of the city led to an increase in their numbers, and in turn an increase in the number of Europeans in the city. They constructed buildings for themselves and opened exchange banks and other services for themselves and local residents. Haifa also began to attract Jewish immigrants who at first settled in the Jewish quarter in the eastern section of the city near the Hijaz railway station. They later began to build and strengthen their economy. A noticeable improvement in the tourism sector took place. The movement of tourists to the Holy Land increased, particularly coming from Europe. Muslim pilgrims visited Haifa after their arrival by train on their way to the holy sites of the Hijaz. The British travel agency, Thomas Cook and Sons, opened offices in Haifa and other large Palestinian cities and advertised a program that included train travel from Haifa to Samek and a trip around Lake Tiberias, taking in the Christian holy sites in Tiberias and Kafr Nahum, and then continuing on to Damascus. The trips and tours of this agency enjoyed great demand among European tourists who found them to meet both their travel and entertainment needs. And I would like to finish my presentation by showing some pictures from HAIFA, and this is the railway station, HAIFA railway station, which symbolizes the arrival of technology, civilization, or so. Which this is interpreted by scholars with such remarks, and this is Sütun-i Ali, exalted column, erected after the opening of the Hijaz railway station at HAIFA. And this is, for example, a picture from this column and a wheel with wings, which shows the meaning of the Hijaz railway, indeed, for the Ottomans, of course. This is the Ottoman flag at the other side, which shows, it symbolizes the Ottomans brought this railway civilization, unquote. And this is a railway, this is a locomotive. And this is pilgrims praying after their arrival by ship to HAIFA. And this is the end of slide. And thank you so much for your patience, for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cicek, for a brilliant, comprehensive, highly informative lecture. I really learned a great deal personally. And now, if there are any questions or comments. Yes?
The Emir of Mecca, just I wanted to ask that the Emir of Mecca refused or didn't want the railway to be extended to Mecca, or what? I confused about this point.
Yes, they considered that the extension of railway would threaten their autonomy in Mecca, but not only the Emir of Mecca, but also the governor of Hijaz, the Ottoman official, who also opposed the extension of the Hijaz railway to Mecca. In the beginning, they for example, opposed to the extension of the railway to Medina as well. But their opposition does not mean anything indeed. They could create some resistance by the support of the Bedouin, that's right. But if the Ottoman state wanted it to extend, if they were able to find funding and political decisiveness, dedication, I think it would be completed to Mecca. But the problem was mainly due to the stemmed from the central government rather than the resistance of the Emir of Mecca or the Bedouin. It was just a rhetoric used by the Emir and the governor, local Ottoman officials.
For them, it was only a power struggle, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That's the case for Aun al-Rafiq, but Sharif Hussein, for example, who settled the problems, the leader of the Arab revolt, who he solved the problems between the Ottoman government and the Bedouin and settled the problems. Very interesting. The opposing one was the Emir Aun al-Rafiq. Later, Sharif Hussein also opposed the extension, but in the beginning, he supported the unionist government to extend the Hijaz railway to settle the problems with the Bedouin or other resistance groups.
I understand from the beginning of your talk that the aim behind the railway is for the Ottomans to prove that Islam is compatible with modernity and the Ottoman Empire is a modern state. But with the execution of the project, it showed that it is not, because they had to import the locomotives, they had to import the wood, they had to import the iron. And I'm wondering, was there, and there was obviously British and French resistance to it at some point, was there anything in the European literature that a discussion about, okay, now we can see the Ottomans are incapable of
I,
doing anything
I did
serious.
not come across with such, but it would be very interesting. I did not come across with which. For example, I have made a research through the Times and other some British newspapers, but I could not find anything, any articles or news reports like that. I could not find, but it would be interesting.
I think maybe the incompatibility of Islam and science or progress would probably be indicated more by the fact that the Ottomans had to hire foreign engineers rather than the importation of materials. The importation of materials is sometimes inevitable in building such big projects. But at any rate, thank you. Talha, I wanted to make this observation because I suppose everybody was under this impression that actually all the money that financed the building of the railway was Muslim money.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that Christians of the Ottoman Empire, Jews of the Ottoman Empire, did make donations. And I discovered this also. It was a surprise to me.
By 1902 they allowed, but after 1902 maybe. But this is the Ottoman Empire. Decision doesn't mean that it was implemented.
But also, I mean, the donations came from Christians as well as Muslims. Donations came even from such a person like Herzl.
But he was returned.
Was returned, yes. But for example, the Archbishop of some town in Anatolia,
Emir of Kuwait.
the Emir of Kuwait is Muslim.
Yeah, he also contributed as an
Yes, of course, that's Muslim money. But I'm referring to Christian and Jewish money, which was raised from Ottoman subjects. So there was actually, they did receive substantial amounts of, and this came as a surprise to me actually, because I have always read that this project was financed totally by Muslim money.
It's just a rhetoric, I think. It was used to advertise among Indian Muslims and other colonial subjects, Muslim subjects.
But were these voluntary donations? Or
Yes, some of them, as he has demonstrated, some of them were deduction from salaries. But some of them, for example, the Archbishop, yes, it was voluntary, yes.
Do we know for proof? I guess on paper it won't show if.
If you donate, for example, a large sum in the name of a community, the assumption is that maybe there is some kind of moral coercion. I don't know, I can't tell, but there were also, donations that were voluntary.
Voluntarism is a quite tricky issue in that. How would you determine the boundaries of voluntary? It may be seen voluntary, but they may feel themselves to donate. They had to donate. It's difficult to find a line between voluntarism and coercion.
There's some literature from the archives of the Christian churches where basically someone came and that's the only way probably.
Someone came and
ask them to
collection box. So that's possible.
Or they got something in lieu for maintenance.
You see, that's possible. But for example, there were people beyond the Ottoman Empire who made donations, and these, of course, were not forced to do so. So there is also voluntary. Most of the donations were voluntary, except in fact those that applied to civil servants and military personnel and so on. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Dr. Cicek.
And thanks for you for coming.